I still remember that evening like it's etched into my bones. It was supposed to be a celebration, a family milestone that I thought would make me proud. Instead, I found myself standing alone on the edges of it all, as if I were nothing more than a shadow at my own son's table. I had dressed carefully, picking a soft blue dress and the earrings my mother left me, hoping they might remind everyone that I was still here, still part of this family. But when I arrived, it became painfully clear that my presence was not welcome. While the others sat at long tables under the glow of string lights, I was guided quietly to a corner, set apart from the laughter and toasts. My seat wasn't among them, it was near the back, where the servers hurried past with trays, where no one would notice if I was missing. The sting of humiliation cut deep. I had given so much of myself over the years, long nights, early mornings, sacrifices that went unseen. I remembered all the times I worked extra shifts just to keep food on the table after my husband passed. I remembered the afternoons I skipped meals so my son could have what he needed for school. And now, after everything, I was being treated as though I didn't belong. It wasn't just the physical distance that hurt, it was the way my son avoided my eyes, the way his new wife smiled sweetly for the crowd, but dismissed me with a glance that said I was an inconvenience. I sat there quietly, listening to the clink of glasses, the laughter that seemed so far away, and wondered how a family I had built with my own hands could leave me feeling like an outsider. But here's the part they didn't know. Behind my silence, behind the wrinkles and gray hair they took as weakness, I held something far stronger than they imagined. They thought I was powerless, easy to push aside, but I wasn't. I had my own leverage, my own resources carefully built over years of persistence and planning. As I sat there in that forgotten corner, I let the sting of their rejection settle into something else, not defeat, not despair, but resolve. They believed I was nothing. They would soon learn just how wrong they were. And that night, for the very first time, I felt the faint stirrings of a different kind of strength, a strength I would need, because what lay ahead was far darker and far more complicated than any of them expected. I left that family gathering with a smile fixed on my face, but inside, I was unraveling. The humiliation clung to me like a second skin. Yet when I closed my apartment door that night, when the noise of celebration faded into silence, something shifted. Instead of tears, I felt a stirring of memory, echoes of lessons from my late husband, Daniel. Daniel had been a quiet man, not one for grand speeches, but every word he shared carried weight. I remembered the evenings we sat at the kitchen table, the kids already asleep, and he would gently remind me that strength wasn't about how loud you were. It was about being prepared, about being steady when storms came. He had a habit of saving small amounts, hiding them in envelopes tucked between the pages of his books. "You never know when you'll need it," he used to say, and back then, I didn't realize just how deeply that philosophy would shape me. After his passing, I kept that habit alive. Not just the envelopes of cash, but a deeper kind of preparation. While my family thought I lived paycheck to paycheck on my modest pension, they didn't know about the small investments I made quietly, the way I tracked every bill and receipt, the little savings account I opened in my name only. To them, I was the aging widow in hand-me-down cardigans. In reality, I was someone who had survived storms before, and I knew how to survive them again. People often mistake wrinkles for weakness, silence for surrender. My daughter-in-law certainly did.
She saw me as someone easy to sideline, too frail to question her authority, too simple to notice when things didn't add up. But I wasn't blind. I wasn't deaf. I had simply chosen patience over confrontation, until that night reminded me how dangerous patience could become. That weekend, I pulled out a worn box from the back of my closet. Inside were notebooks, ledgers, and years of carefully stored paperwork. I flipped through the pages, my handwriting neat and precise, detailing transactions, birthdays, even the smallest loans I'd ever extended to help family members. Some might call it obsessive, but I called it survival. I learned long ago that memory fades, but ink does not. As I combed through those records, I found something I hadn't expected, a strange pattern that made my stomach twist. Payments listed under my name that I never made. Transfers that didn't match my accounts. At first, I thought it must be some clerical error, but the more I checked, the clearer it became. Someone had been moving money around, using my information, but in ways I hadn't authorized. I sat there, the late-night clock ticking toward 01:00, a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands, staring at the evidence. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just being excluded from a dinner table. It was financial. It was deliberate. And it was personal. That realization hit me harder than the dismissal at the party. This wasn't about me being unimportant in the family anymore. This was about someone exploiting my name, my history, and my trust for their own gain. And suddenly, all those years of careful preparation, all the nights I'd quietly added numbers to my ledger, became my greatest weapon. Because I wasn't just a forgotten widow. I was the one who had the receipts. Literally. I felt Daniel's voice in my ear as I closed the notebook. Calm, steady, reminding me storms always come. But the ones who prepare, survive. Only this time, I wasn't preparing just to survive. I was preparing to fight back. And deep down, I knew the betrayal I had uncovered was only the beginning. After that night with my ledgers spread across the table, I knew I couldn't ignore what I had found. For years, I had played the role of the quiet grandmother, smiling politely, asking simple questions, letting the younger ones believe I didn't understand their world. But now that disguise became my armor. If they saw me as harmless, then they'd never suspect what I was really doing. I started small. At first, it was just pulling out old bank statements I had tucked away in my files. I cross-checked them against the suspicious entries in my notebooks, line after line. The picture became clearer. Accounts had been opened using my name, but with addresses I had never lived at. Transactions were being funneled to places that made no sense for a woman on a modest pension. The handwriting of deception was there in black and white. The more I uncovered, the more my heart sank. This wasn't a clerical error. This was someone using my identity like a mask, wearing it to steal in the dark. Each discovery felt like a knife, reopening wounds of betrayal I thought I had already endured at that dinner table. I didn't stop there. I began looking for patterns. I remembered Daniel's old saying, "Every lie leaves a trail." He had been right. That trail wound its way not only through bank accounts, but also through credit card charges, property tax records, even online purchases. Late into the night, while the world outside slept, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop glowing in the dark. Social media, public records, business directories, I scoured them all. At 02:00 in the morning, my eyes burning from the screen, I stumbled upon something that made my stomach twist. A business registration filed in my name. Not just any business, but one tied to real estate transactions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I had never signed anything like that. Never. Yet there it was, official and stamped, sitting in the state database. Whoever had done this hadn't just dipped into my identity for a quick gain. They had built entire operations around it, laundering money and weaving me into the story as if I were a willing participant. The realization left me shaken. My mind jumped to my family, to the smug look my daughter-in-law gave me across the dinner table, the way my son avoided my eyes. Had they known, were they complicit, or was one of them the architect of this scheme? The thought made my blood run cold. Outrage welled up inside me, pushing aside the sadness. I had been humiliated, dismissed, treated as if I were invisible. But what cut deeper was that someone had chosen me as the perfect victim, assuming I wouldn't notice, wouldn't question, wouldn't fight back. But they underestimated me. As dawn crept in through the blinds, I gathered everything I had found: copies of records, screenshots, old statements. My little pile of evidence might have looked ordinary to anyone else, but to me, it was the start of a case that proved beyond a doubt I was being set up for something much larger than family politics. The turning point came when I matched one specific transfer, $300,000, funneled out of a corporate account into an account under my name, but registered at an address 30 miles away. I didn't live there, but I knew who did. It was a property connected to my daughter-in-law's family. In that moment, everything clicked. The missing money, the odd tension at dinners, the way she always insisted on handling the paperwork. The betrayal wasn't just whispered in corners, it was written into the very foundation of their lives. I sat back, my hands trembling not from fear anymore, but from determination. The game had changed. This wasn't about family slights or cold shoulders at dinner. This was fraud, identity theft, a betrayal so calculated it threatened to destroy me if I stayed silent. And I knew then I couldn't stay silent any longer. I chose the evening carefully. It was just past 19 when I walked up to my son's front door, carrying a folder under my arm. The air was heavy, the kind that makes silence feel sharper than words. I wasn't there to shout or beg for answers. I was there to let the truth do the talking. The house felt strangely formal when I stepped inside, as if it knew something was about to break. My son hovered near me, nervous and confused, while his wife greeted me with that flawless smile she wore like armor. I sat down at the dining table, the same place where I had once been humiliated. But this time, I came prepared. I laid a single page on the polished wood. It was evidence of a transfer, $300,000 moved out of a corporate account into an account under my name, tied to an address I had never lived at. The numbers were bold, undeniable. My son's eyes widened as he scanned it, while his wife shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply placed the next sheet on the table, a business registration and LLC set up under my name, with her sister's condo listed as the mailing address. The signature wasn't mine. It was too practiced, too neat, a forgery trying too hard to look authentic. I explained slowly, each word measured, how I had uncovered these documents. Late nights digging through records, comparing dates and addresses, noticing patterns that could no longer be dismissed as clerical errors. My son shook his head in disbelief, still trying to reconcile what he saw with what he thought he knew about his wife. She tried to explain it away, how older people sometimes forget things, how mistakes happen in banks. But I was ready. I pulled out the photograph, a security still from a small-town bank. Her face turned toward the teller. My name printed clearly on the deposit slip she held. Her polished composure cracked for the first time.
The room thickened with silence. My son stepped closer, caught between horror and denial. I kept my tone steady, my hands calm against the table. I revealed how the trail led not just to phantom accounts, but to a storage unit registered in her sister's name. Inside were boxes of paperwork, all in her handwriting, drafts of forms, copies of my identification, even a color-coded ledger tracking money flows under labels like family cover and business narrative. She froze when I mentioned the ledger. She knew I had seen it. She knew her secrets weren't secrets anymore. It was in that moment that the perfect mask she had worn for years shattered. My son turned toward her, realization hitting him with the weight of betrayal. The woman he thought he knew, the mother of his children, had been orchestrating an elaborate fraud in his own home. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I only let the truth hang there, heavy and undeniable. I told myself that silence could wound sharper than anger, and it did. Her defenses collapsed. Her hands trembled. She tried to paint herself as misunderstood, a victim of circumstance, but the documents spread before us said otherwise. Then I placed the final page on the table, the authorization form that gave her access to my son's corporate accounts. The date was damning 14 months before the first missing funds appeared. This hadn't been a moment of desperation. It had been a long, calculated plan. The twist landed harder than any words I could have spoken. She wasn't the polished, charitable wife she pretended to be. She was the manipulator, the thief, the one who had tried to use me as the scapegoat for her crimes. I stood, gathering the folder as carefully as I had opened it. My son looked hollow, broken between grief and fury. She sat frozen, her mask gone, the weight of exposure pressing down. As I stepped outside, the night air felt cooler, steadier. The confrontation had changed everything. The truth was no longer mine alone. It was out in the open, impossible to deny. And now, the fallout was about to begin. The morning after the confrontation, I woke before the sun. At 5:45 in the morning, the house was so quiet I could hear the radiator ticking. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the folder closed in front of me. The night air had cooled my anger into something steadier. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was tired. Yes, but clear. Truth has a way of rearranging the furniture inside you. And when I looked around my life, things were finally where they belonged. By 09:09 o'clock, emails began to land. The investigator acknowledged receipt of the signature cards and the storage unit inventory. A case number appeared in my inbox like a new spine. Later, there were calls I let roll to voicemail. I listened in small pieces, taking notes. The bank confirmed activity in the fraudulent account. The compliance officer at my son's company flagged the authorization form and locked certain permissions. Real consequences began to move like heavy machinery, slow at first, then impossible to stop. My son texted at 10:12 asking if I could meet. I didn't answer right away. He needed to sit with the same silence I had learned to live in. By noon, an attorney for the company reached out to schedule a statement. I cleared my calendar. I have always believed in showing up when it matters. Over the next week, the beautiful fiction collapsed in layers. Vendors called about unpaid invoices that had been masked by transfers.
A client asked why a consulting fee appeared under an unfamiliar LLC. The color-coded ledger from the storage unit became a map anyone could read. Words like restitution and fraud and civil liability sat on conference tables where holiday menus used to rest. It was brutal, unpoetic, paperwork-heavy justice, the kind that doesn't make headlines but does stop the bleeding.
At home, the emotional fallout came in waves. My grandchildren stood in doorways with eyes too old for their ages, asking if their lives would change, if schools and friends and bedtime would remain steady. I couldn't promise what I didn't control. So I promised what I did, that love wasn't going anywhere, that my door would be open, that the grown-ups would carry the weight so they could keep being children. I cooked simple food and let them talk about small things, science projects, a soccer game, a book report, because ordinary life can be a life raft. There was mourning too, the quiet kind. I grieved the version of my daughter-in-law I had tried to believe in, the woman with the gracious smile who brought flowers and said all the right things. I grieved the years I spent minimizing small alarms for the sake of family peace. It's a strange ache, losing a story as much as losing a person. But as the days passed, I found room for a different feeling: relief. Not the gloating sort, not triumph, just relief that the gaslight had been turned off and the room was finally bright enough to see. My son cycled through his own weather's denial, rage, shame, exhaustion. We met at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in a small office with beige walls and a window that looked over a parking lot. We didn't rehash the confrontation. We talked about the kids, about his responsibilities at work, about getting honest help. I watched him hold the wreckage and choose not to look away. That choice mattered. Love insists on accountability, even when it trembles. The legal part unfolded without theatrics. Formal statements, a protective order around my credit profile, freeze notices on the fraudulent accounts. The company initiated an audit across all divisions, and the board called an emergency session. Agreements were drafted: restitution plans, clawbacks, reimbursement for the stolen funds. There were consequences at home too: a move to a smaller rental, the sale of a car, new routines that valued reality over image. It looked like loss from the outside. Inside, it felt like oxygen returning to a room that had been starved of air. In the evenings, when the house quieted and I folded away the day's letters, I thought about the line between forgiveness and permission. People like to blur it for convenience, but they are not the same. I can forgive a person without granting them access to my life, my name, my accounts. I can wish someone well while setting a lock on my door. Boundaries, I learned, are an expression of love for the people who still depend on me to stand upright. I kept a small ritual to remind myself who I am. At 7:15 each morning, I would write 3 sentences in a notebook: what I'm grateful for, what I can control today, and one brave thing I will do. Sometimes the brave thing was calling a creditor to correct a record. Sometimes it was telling my grandson the truth in a way his heart could hold. Sometimes it was boiling pasta and sitting at the table, refusing to let fear eat with me. The children taught me something too. They asked hard questions without malice, without the adult instinct to protect a narrative. They wanted to know if doing the right thing always hurts this much. I told them that telling the truth can break things that were already cracked, that it doesn't feel good at first, that feeling awful doesn't mean you chose wrong. I told them kindness and courage are not opposites. You can have both. You can be gentle and still say no. People sometimes whisper about humiliation as if justice should be tidy. It isn't. It leaves stacks of forms and awkward school pickups and neighbors who look away in the grocery aisle. But it also leaves you with a spine you can trust.
And once you feel that your own back beneath your hand, you don't trade it for approval again. By the end of the month, the investigators had what they needed. The accounts were closed. The ledger became evidence. The company put safeguards in place that should have existed all along. There were apologies, some real, some performative. I didn't sort them out loud. I just watched behavior change or stay the same and adjusted my distance accordingly. If you're listening because you felt that same cold hush after a betrayal, I want you to hear this part clearly. You are allowed to choose justice without becoming hard. You can hold people accountable and still tuck your grandchildren in at night with a soft voice. You can mourn the story you wanted and still write the next chapter with steady hands.
I'm not who I was before all this. I'm quieter in some ways, louder in others. I keep copies of everything. I say no faster. I laugh more with the children. And when the kettle whistles, I answer it like a small promise to keep showing up. If my story helped you find a little courage, if it reminded you that your name is yours to protect, leave a like, share this with someone who needs it, and tell me where you're listening from. Your voice matters more than you know, and if today feels heavy, meet me here tomorrow at 7:15 on paper. We'll write 3 sentences together and call it a start.